I was just asking who was on the call and what universities you all are from, so that I have a good basis in understanding what your current installations are and your experience levels with Tableau. Okay, so we are at 10 o'clock. So May, do you want me to go ahead and get started, or do you want to wait a few more minutes for people to come on? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start recording so that you all can have this recording to share for those who cannot join and those who might want to share it with some of their colleagues. I've invited Sean, who's one of my wonderful product consultants within the higher education area, and he's going to do a demo for you all on Tableau. And if you have questions, if you'll put them in the chat during the demo, then we can address those at the end. We will have open Q&A, but if you have a quick question, you can put it in the chat, and then we'll make sure that we go in the order of the chat questions first and then go open up to Q&A. So I'm going to let Sean introduce himself. Like I said, he is one of my product consultants who is very, very familiar with education, higher education specifically, and he's going to show you all the Tableau demo, creating, a small viz, publishing, and then how to share, being able to see permissioning, things along those lines. So I will hand it over to Sean to give an introduction about himself and get rolling.
Great. Thank you, Whitney. And good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Dynas, and I work here at Tableau as a product consultant. So my role basically is to help people as they get started with implementing Tableau in their organizations or are looking to point Tableau at a new use case. So I have previous experience from IBM implementing large enterprise scale systems. And then here at Tableau, I've worked kind of in a specialist role with folks in our higher education sector, as well as those in state and local government. So I've seen and got the opportunity to work with folks all across the nation, pointing Tableau at a bunch of different use cases. But given the folks on the line today, we're going to be looking specifically at IR data in institutional research. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And Whitney, if you'll tell me whenever that shows up here in the screen share.
I see it perfectly. And everybody else good?
Yes.
Okay, super.
Yeah, it's fine.
Great. I know we've got some folks from all across the board in terms of exposure to Tableau. Some people may be brand new to it, and others may have used it in person and got their hands dirty using Tableau. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of a high-level overview, walk you through the process of an end user's experience using Tableau, and then we're actually going to connect to data, build out some dashboards, and publish those up. So that's the full life cycle in about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So what you're seeing here is our product page out on our website. And basically, Tableau is two products in our platform. Tableau Desktop is the authoring tool where you'll connect to data and build out visualizations for others to consume. And Tableau Server or Tableau Online are our sharing platforms. The only difference there, one is hosted on-prem and Tableau Online is hosted in the cloud. So that's where your end users are going to be able to log in and see the visualizations you create and interact with them, ask their own questions of the data, but not necessarily go about building all of the original content that you might have. So we're actually going to start from that end user perspective. So Tableau Server is what we'll start with. So say I'm someone that wants to look at the dashboards that IR has created, or maybe we're interested in tracking some of these metrics, and a dean of a college is interested in seeing how those different metrics have changed over time for their university's college. So looking at this dashboard, we can see a high-level overview scorecard showing us some entering student metrics in terms of the amount of aid that they receive on average, the entering SAT score, years to graduate, graduation percentage, as well as a nice bell curve here of our entering student SAT scores that are colored here by the amount of aid. And then we see enrollment for about the last 10 years of data across all of these different colleges, and a scatter plot of their years to graduate versus graduation percentage. So if I make a selection here within our dashboard, let's say I want to look at this lower quadrant of low graduation percentage, then we see our entire visualization changed. You can see the scorecard metrics have updated. We can see any changes that were made across our organization's entering students, as well as the enrollment across the different colleges. Looks like these are actually isolated to only 6 colleges within our university. Maybe I want to drill in further on this larger outlier where they graduate in less than 5 years, but there's a very low percentage of students who actually graduate. So we can see here that that's actually the students who came in with a 950 and a 700, which is fairly far below our average SAT entering scores. And if I'm more interested in further details, I can come in here and access the full data. So that's something I might want to export as something to send off to recruiting to say, hey, we gave a lot of scholarship money to these students, but there's not a lot of them that end up graduating. So let's see how we can change our recruiting strategy to target students that are going to succeed in our environment. So that's just a basic overview of my interactions here as an end user. There's a couple other features I wanted to go through in Tableau Server, just as a way that you can more fully power your organization to be data-driven. So up here, if I want to see this sent to me every morning, or maybe every Monday morning, I can have this visualization packaged up and emailed to me on a schedule that I define. Or if I want to subscribe my team, I can do that here as well. So that'll send me an image in my inbox every morning of the most recent data. If I see an outlier there, I can click on that and come out to the interactive version out here on Tableau Server. Additionally, if I want to share this within my organization, I can just send this link to other Tableau Server users. Or if we're interested in embedding this into a portal that might be publicly facing with our intranet or the employees of our institution, then we can just drop this embed code into maybe a website that everybody's accessing reporting already for IR. Additionally, if I'm more of a power user, then I can come over here and download the Tableau workbook and manipulate that with my Tableau Desktop license. Or if I'm interested in making some modifications, or I see questions, or I have questions that aren't necessarily answered by this type of dashboard, I can come in here and do some light editing in the web. But from here, I'm going to transition into actually how do we build out this type of content with Tableau Desktop. So we were looking at the end user perspective, and now we're going to look at more of the analyst perspective of folks who are connecting to data, might be more familiar with the schema of the data warehouse or databases that they're connecting with. And that occurs over here within Tableau Desktop. So within Tableau Desktop, again, the authoring tool where you connect to data and build out those visualizations that we saw earlier. We're going to actually establish some connections to the same data that that dashboard was built off of. So here you can see all of our native connections to enterprise systems, and this covers a large spectrum of relational databases, cubes, as well as cloud data sources, big data, columnar data sources, web data, stuff like that. Just for the purpose of today's demo, we're just going to use some Excel files. So I'm going to select my admissions data. But the process of connecting to data is pretty similar across all of our connectors. If you're accessing a database, then you provide some credentials and an address to maybe point it towards. And we'd see a bunch of tables here held within that database or data warehouse. So for today, I'm just going to drag out my admits table, and we'll see a preview of that data below. Just one other caveat that I'll point out is that a lot of our connectors allow you to choose between a live connection and an extract. Now, that live connection is actually querying against your source systems every time you drag and drop or interact with the visualization, whereas the extract is a copy of that data, kind of a snapshot in time, packaged up into a Tableau data extract. So that can take load off of your critical systems if it's not absolutely important that you have up to the second results based on the most recent queries that return from your data source. So I'm going to maintain that live connection here for the moment, and we'll just pivot over to sheet 1. So we can see that Tableau recognized my column names as measures and dimensions. So measures are these numeric values that you might slice and dice by these dimensions up top, which are more categorical fields like college, the type of aid students received, the major they chose, stuff like that. So we'll just start by dragging out some information about, let's say, our SAT scores. And we can see here the overall sum of the values of my SAT scores, but that doesn't seem quite right to me, so I'm going to make this change to show it as an average. And now we can see our average entering SAT score is about 1080. And I might want to break that down by the college that those students entered into. Looks like that's pretty consistent across the entire landscape here. But already we can see Tableau is showing me this as a bar chart, and just based off of the data that we dragged out there, we can tell Tableau is recommending this as kind of a visual best practice when you're making comparisons across multiple data sets in different categorical fields. And we can see here just sorting those out. Actually, the College of Political Science and College of Nursing have the highest entering SAT scores on average. And maybe we want to...
Hey, yep. Sean, I just got a message that somebody's not able to hear. Can anybody else tell me if they're having problems hearing?
I don't have a problem.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And Mai says she's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, let us know in the chat if there's anything going wrong with our kind of technical setup here. But let's keep going then over here. Let us know in the chat if there's any issues with audio or the screen share not working. I know we've had some problems in the past that are more due to our networks and that side of things.
And if you wouldn't mind, if you don't have any questions or comments, would you mind muting so that we don't hear typing and background noise during the rest of the demonstration? Thank you.
Thank you. So from here, we were looking at our average SAT score across each college, and maybe we want to break that down by major even further. So we can start to see where there's some outliers here. We see the arts and letters students typically have a higher entering SAT score, or the computer science department. Now, this got pretty busy across our viz, and maybe we're only interested in seeing the major that has the top 10, or the top 10 majors that have the highest average SAT score. So I'm going to remove college from the view, rotate this so I can see it a little better, and then I'm actually going to apply a filter here by dragging my SAT score over to filters. And let me look at actually my major over to filters. Let's look at my top fields by average SAT score. And we can see here it's arts and letters, natural resources, stuff like that. So you might want to understand how those programs are targeting students that typically are high achieving coming in, and maybe track if those are trends that we see over time as they move towards graduation. So from here, I know we had just been looking at the raw SAT scores, but I actually want to manipulate those in a way that gives me kind of those bins that we saw earlier. So I'm going to move on to creating a new sheet here and changing how that SAT score comes in as a bin. So Tableau gives me a guess at the average size that we might want to split our bins out by, but I'm going to put those in increments of 50. And now that actually came in as a brand new field here in my data set. So I can drag that out here in the view, and then I want to look at the number of student IDs associated with each of those. So I'm going to select the count distinct of our student IDs, and there we get that nice bell curve. So just with a couple clicks, and I keyed in a couple things on my keyboard just to tell it the size of bins, but here we can start seeing where it looks like the bulk of our students come from this cohort, maybe slightly above the midpoint, and we might want to target students in the future in this area since we see there's quite a few of our students who come in from that particular cohort. One thing that I know I might be playing the role of an analyst here, but my supervisors and the folks within IR are interested in seeing how we allocate scholarship dollars across the students that come in with certain SAT scores. So I have some of that information here in my data set, and I'll start looking at, let's say, our average scholarship. And we can see that's a little bit hard to read the gradient here, so let me change my colors and make that stepped a little bit. So here we can see a bit darker towards our higher achieving students. And we can see there's about $4,000 allocated to this student in the far right side of our bell curve. So I'm hearing a bit of an echo through the phone. If anybody's not on mute out there, that'd be a big help to me, since I don't need to hear a second version of myself coming through.
Good morning. Good.
So it sounds like someone else is on the phone over there. If you can just throw yourself on mute, that'd be a big help. So this gives us a good picture of the scholarship allocations that we are sending to our students that enter at certain levels of SAT scores, but that also needs to encompass the grants that they might be receiving. So I'm just going to create a that merges those two fields. So I'm looking at my scholarship dollars, and I also want to add the grants that they might be receiving. So like a Pell Grant from the federal government, or any type of research grants they might have coming in. And we'll call this combined aid. And that gives us a better picture of how things are actually represented here. So let's make my changes to my color scale one more time. There we go. So we can see we actually have a higher allocation here to students that aren't necessarily at the very top of our SAT scores, but maybe we want to add additional scholarship dollars to students who are not necessarily in the highest ranks of our SAT scores. So from here, I want to start looking at some of the trends across our data set in terms of time and how that affects enrollment. So I'm going to call this, let's say, our SAT distribution by scholarship. And I'll move on to a new piece of analysis. So I was looking at our distinct count of student IDs. And we can see across our data set that's about 38,000 students. Now I want to start looking at that by the trends over time. And we can see Tableau automatically switch that to a line graph since we're looking at an increment of time. So over time we can tell there's been an uptick in average enrollment. And if I had additional fields here, what we often see in use cases with recruiting is they want to understand how students are progressing through different stages of a pipeline. And Tableau can actually understand the native hierarchy of something like a date here. So we can tell that all of these dates come in Q3, and actually I bet they're just the start date of that term, since they're all in September of Q3. But that's just something that is built in. I didn't have to do anything to modify my data or create any magical calculations under the hood here. If I'm not a very technical user, Tableau works really well with folks who know the data but don't necessarily have all the technical skills to write very complex SQL queries or do additional coding for scripting and advanced ETL, stuff like that. So as we're looking at this information at a summary level, I want to start breaking that down by college. And maybe I want to see that stacked on top of each other as an area chart. So we can already start seeing that our College of Natural Science, our College of Arts and Sciences, and Social Science are pretty big contributors to our overall enrollment. And there's quite a bit of a spike here in 2002 to 2003. And we might want to understand further what was occurring at the university at that point. Maybe we had a big recruitment push or got additional funding to bring in additional professors, stuff like that. I know there's a relationship here between our college and our major that students choose. Since each major only goes with one college, I'm just going to drag and drop that on top of the field over here. And I've just created a hierarchy. So if I want to, I can drill into further levels of detail. Now I know this gets a little bit busy, but we can start seeing some slices in our data where the criminal justice major might be of interest to us. So we want to highlight that one in particular. Or we saw changes in 2002 to 2003. And we see there's quite a bit of an uptick here in the humanities pre-law department. Maybe that's something that we pushed additional funding towards. So from here, I'm going to collapse that back up. And I'm going to call this our enrollment trends. And finally, I want to see where are these students coming from. So I have some of that information stored here in my data set. And I'm just going to double click on the field called state. And that's requires no additional modification of our data. I'm just seeing where we have students coming from all over the US. And then a couple outliers here in the Pacific Islands. Tableau's mapping engine is pretty robust. We can actually map all over the world and can detect natively geographic roles all the way down to zip and postal code, congressional district, area code, cities, or you can bring in your latitude and longitude fields if that's something of interest to you. So we might want to target specific areas of the country that we have a lot of students coming from. So I'm going to color these by the number of student IDs that we have. So it looks like the majority of our students are coming from Arizona and California. And I'm only interested in the lower 48. So I'm just going to select those states and exclude them. Now that just becomes a filter up top, and I can remove that if I want to. But for the moment, I'm just going to focus in on these two states, since that's where we get the majority of our students, they're skewing a few of these results, and might want to exclude those as well so I can see, okay, where do we've seen states number 1 and 2 that provide the most of our students, but here we can see states 3 and 4 a little bit more clearly. So we've got our Texas and New Mexico might be additional areas to target for recruiting efforts. I'm just going to click undo so that we can maintain some of that information out here. And we'll call this our student map. Now finally, to kind of complete that picture, we want to understand a bit more about the graduation percentages in all of our colleges, including some of the aid that we add to some of those students as they come in. So I'm going to start looking at the graduation percentage and the years to graduate. So that aggregates all of our information into one dot up here as 2 different average measures. And I'm going to start breaking that down by the colleges and the majors. So just dragging out college here. I'm going to add that to color. And then breaking it further down by the majors. We can see there's a nice little clustering here of the College of Arts and Sciences. A lot of their majors tend to have similar graduation percentages and years to graduate. But we see there's some outliers already. So the College of Business Management, and this might be a little bit difficult to see because we've got 0 here on our axis. So I'm just going to remove that. We might be able to get a better picture. There we go. So we've got some high graduation percentages, but these students are taking about 6 years to graduate. So we might want to target some of these in the College of Engineering. Or, for instance, we might want to just understand which of those majors cluster together in a way that we're not seeing currently. So just hopping over here to our Analytics tab, I'm going to bring out this cluster feature. And that's actually computing k-means clustering on all of the measures represented out here. I'm going to edit how that's calculated, and it just popped up on my other screen. But let's say I want to look at 5 clusters instead of 2. So we can tell which of these might be of interest to us as we target maybe how we allocate the amount of scholarship dollars. We'll pull out that combined aid amount onto size so we can see where we might be adding additional funding to these students, but not necessarily seeing the results that we want. Just a bunch of different ways to slice and dice your data, especially over here on the Analytics tab if you want to add some more summary metrics or some trend lines. I know this might get a little busy because we've got a bunch of different colors, but I'm actually going to remove the trend line per color and the confidence bands. And it looks like at least we have a positive trend here across all of our data, where if you have a little bit longer time at our institution, you do tend to graduate at a higher rate. If we break that down further by color, then we can see the different changes in our trend lines based on those clusters. So for the moment, I'm going to remove that trend line, and I just want to look at my averages across the table. And I'm going to put my college back here on color. Now to summarize all this information, we're going to put that into a dashboard that's interactive, much like we saw at the very beginning. I'm just going to call this our graduation metrics. So a dashboard is that combination of sheets across our entire data set. And we'll just start by bringing out some of our information. As these sheets get dropped out here, I can see a nice footprint of what they're going to occupy. And maybe I'll include our student map for the moment. But from here, I want it to be interactive, and just clicking on, let's say, a state here doesn't actually filter out any of my data. But to make this interactive, I can just click on Use this sheet as filter, and now that becomes interactive. So we can see changes across, let's say, our enrollment from California. Where do those students end up going? And where do the students from Arizona end up enrolling? And what are the trends across those particular areas? I like using the map, especially because it does allow us to understand trends based on maybe regions or specific states in particular. But for now, I'm going to make some of these other sheets into filters as well. And before I publish this up, I know that there's going to be deans from different colleges that will be accessing this report. And I only want them to see the information that's important to them, but I don't need to build out a dashboard for each one of those deans specifically. So I'm going to go over to, let's say, our enrollment metrics and these trends. And I'm going to create a bit of a different combination of data. So coming back out to our data source, we actually have a second table within our database or in a different system that holds our information. So we're going to look at that security table in maybe a different database. What we're establishing here is actually a cross-database join. So we have information about which school is present in that data set and which user on our server might be accessing that viz. So just joining those two tables together from different systems is pretty easy. I didn't have to do any SQL. I didn't have to write any code here to make this happen. So paging back over to our enrollment trends, I can see we now have information from our security table as well as the admits data source that we originally were working with. From here, I know that I want to create a user filter. So I'm just going to call this user filter. And I'm going to check what is the full name of our user and whether it's equal to a member of the user field in that second security table. I'll add that here to my viz. And I'll select true as my filter option. So if there's a user that matches the person who's logged in within this data table, then it's only going to show them information related to the records that are appropriate for them. So I can see the user that I've logged in as is Will Smith, and he's only able to see information about the College of Business. I want to apply this to all the worksheets that use this data source. And coming back out here on my dashboard, everything has changed to represent what this specific person can see. So for instance, if I change it to previewing it as Jerry Seinfeld, I know he's in our Communication Arts and Sciences department, then it'll only load the data that's appropriate for that person to have access to. So he's able to see Communication, Arts and Sciences, and the College of Business. So before we publish this up, I just want to make sure everything looks right to me as the end user. And I'm going to select my admin role. It's going to put a couple things together here. And there we go. So that looks all right to me. I'm going to remove some of these legends because they're pretty self-explanatory. And then publish this up to our server. So I'll put this in the education project. I'm going to name that something meaningful here. So we have our OCAIR, and I'm going to generate this with a thumbnail for different users. So once this goes up into our Tableau server, that's going to be ready for consumption by people who are already named users out on Tableau server. So we're kind of finishing where we began with information published up to Tableau server. And this will load that dashboard much like we saw within Tableau Desktop. But this is now ready for people to consume out here on the web, just accessing it through their browser. And if I change how I'm logged in, here I'm logged in as an admin, but let's say, let's look at Jerry Seinfeld. See what he's able to understand from our OCAIR demo. So once all of those filters get applied, this specific user is only able to see information about the data that's important or relevant to them, and then they can make changes or selections based on what they're interested in looking at. So that kind of wraps up that piece of the demo, and I wanted to focus just a little bit of our time on how you manage some of the data that gets put into Tableau. Since that data is coming from a lot of disparate sources, there might not be one person, or there might only be one person who understands the schema of that data source or the information that is required to build visualizations like this, or at least just getting the data to Tableau. And that's something that you'll notice back here within Tableau Desktop, we had multiple tables of information from 2 different sources. And I want to preserve that for other folks on my team within IR to be able to come in and access this data source and not have to go through creating these calculations, putting in the user filters, or joining these tables together because they may not have access to them or might not know where they live. So as a Tableau Desktop user, typically this is someone who plays the role of a data steward or someone who's fairly familiar with the schema of that data source. I'm going to publish this data source up to the Tableau server, and I'm actually going to create a data extract before I do that. And then I'll publish that up. We're going to put that in our education folder. And now that's been successfully published up. So in the future, whenever I come in and want to connect to a new data source, I can select Tableau Server here instead of maybe my Oracle database or the Microsoft SQL Server, something like that. I can see the education admits as a new data source. And perhaps somebody on my team doesn't have all of the domain knowledge necessary or information about the systems that all this data comes from. They can just select that data source and not have to go through that process. So we can see here's 2 different versions of the same data source. One of them I built myself, and one I just connected to as, let's say, a second user who might not have the time or the patience to go through creating some of this and putting it together. So I know that's typically important as you start looking at expanding your use of Tableau across a university system. And that's something that we can see here out in the project folders, the different data sources that are published up here. So that kind of wraps up my demonstration here of Tableau. And I know we have a few questions out here in the chat, as well as other folks on the phone who might have more specific ones. So we'll try to pivot to the Q&A session. I'm not sure if I was able to see everything. If Whitney, you got more questions directed directly to you. Hey, Whitney, I think you might be on mute.
Yes, I unmuted everybody but me. So yes, so I got a few questions. One of them was they wanted to know if you were able to share the workbook with them so that as they're going through the recording that they have something to practice with. I don't foresee that being an issue with me sending that out. The other question May had was if Tableau is going to be presenting at OCAIR, and yes, we will definitely be presenting at OCAIR. I will not be there, but we will have a number of people from Tableau who will be there. I don't know what the presentation schedule is at this point, but I can certainly find out if Tableau is going to be doing demonstrations or if it's just going to be come by the booth and we'll do a demonstration for you one-on-one or as a small group, etc. So I can check into that, May. So I'm going to open this up to Q&A. I don't think I saw any other specific questions come across. If I did, I apologize, but please feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that you might have at this point. Are there any questions from anybody?
Looks like we just got one in the chat. When you download the full data from Tableau worksheets, are you able to select certain variables instead of downloading the entire sheet? So is that something within Tableau Desktop you're speaking about, or is that within Tableau Server? Okay, sounds like yes, desktop. So looking at, let's say, just our colleges and the scholarship amount. If you come up here to Worksheet, you can export this image or this information as a crosstab to Excel. And that just loaded over here on my other screen. Does that help answer your question? You can go off mute and just...
I think I have actually unmuted everybody, so everybody's free to just speak out. So we had one question on, can you show us one more time how to set up a filter as user? Are you talking about permissioning there?
I'm talking about how to set up when you log in a server, you can only see your own college.
Sure. So there's a couple different ways that you can accomplish that. And let's look at just like our number of students across each college. So you'll see something change as we bring that data in. So one of the more manual ways that you can create user filters is just by coming up here to Server and Create User Filters. So information about the college, and I can, since I'm logged into my server, I can set up user filters based on, okay, I know Jerry should only see this one, and Anna should see these three, and then Chuck needs to see everything. My admin needs to see everything, and Jonah Hill can see those three. This becomes a new set down here, and if I drop that out here onto filters, then that applies the same kind of logic as we saw before. So I'll switch over here to Chuck. He can see everything still. And let's switch to Jerry, and he's only able to see that one.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's the more manual way of building out some of those user filters. I put together a calculation that actually checks the data tied to each of those users. So one of your fields might be that specific username, and another would be the college that they're associated with. And this calculation, let me open that up. Is actually just checking the full name and whether it's equal to the name of the user. And that was a field out here in our data set. Then that works much like a regular filter with dimensions. You select the possible results that you want to show. So I only want to see data that corresponds with the user, and that's coming from our data source tables. All right. I know we had a couple other questions.
Yes, there was one other question about Tableau Conference. It is in October this year. It's the 9th through the 12th. You can come a day early or stay a day late for additional training at a highly discounted rate than our typical training. We also have certifications we'll be doing during that time. And I can send over with the recording and everything so everybody doesn't have to do a mad scramble. I'll send over the code that you'll need to put in to get your education discount. Education discount is $500 off conference tickets, so your tickets are $1,095. Everything is included as far as your breakfast and lunches, and then we will have a lot of entertainment going on in the evening. So your responsibility will be the cost of conference, air flight, and hotel. And I would say if you are truly interested in going, please make sure and get your hotel booked as soon as possible so that you don't have to traipse to different hotels in the Vegas area.
Yeah, and I'll put this link out here in the chat for everyone if you're interested in digging into more about conference.
A couple of really good questions there. Any other questions from people that we want to walk back over? Anything that Sean has done that maybe you followed but didn't get 100% of it?
But I saw a question out here about exporting raw data instead of just the summary table information. So there's a couple ways to do that. I know we had seen an example earlier with, let's say, our colleges and the total scholarship money. I'm just going to select all these records. So I'm just holding down Shift and clicking on those. And I can go over here to view that underlying data. This is the summary level, but then I might want to see the full data. And I can just click Export All from there. So I think that was sent to me privately here, so I hope, Minghu, that was helpful.
Did that answer your question, Mingyu? Not really. Okay. Can you maybe just talk Sean through it, what you're looking to find out to make sure that we can answer the question correctly for you? Can she select certain variables?
Okay, so just looking at, let's say, the college and the scholarship amount? Something like that, or like the student IDs associated? I think you should be able to, like copying those specifically. Nope. Let me do a little bit of research on that and get back to you, since I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. Part of, I guess, what a lot of our users end up doing is taking extracts of the data that they're interested in, since a lot of those student information systems or learning management systems have a ton of tables with a bunch of fields that might not really be used. So for instance, if I take an extract and say exclude all of the, let me change some of these properties here. Exclude all unused fields. Then it will eliminate the fields that are not currently out in a viz, and that'll reduce the size of the extract. So hiding all unused fields is a great way to eliminate data that's not important. But it sounds like you might be interested in a more specific way to extract data out of a data source. So let me do a little bit of research on that, and then we can get back to you. I know we have some email addresses here from the event.
Yes, I'll send everything over to May, any questions that we haven't answered, and then she will be able to forward them out. I know that there was an additional question. Can you allow access based on group, a filter for each login? You can certainly group people together. Typically the way Tableau, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but typically the way Tableau server is set up, it's typically using Active Directory as the back end, so the rights and permissions of the people, depending on their groups and how they're structured within your infrastructure, that's typically how you would associate and allocate those. But you can say, okay, maybe Sean does not typically fall into this group, but he needs to look at this information. So you could open that up to Sean. Can you possibly mute your phone?
So I think part of that permission question gets a little bit more into, it definitely, I think you're on the right track there, Whitney, whenever you're talking about how people are authenticated into Tableau server, and that's often how you control user filters at the data source level. But for instance, there might be permissions that you want people to have in terms of seeing specific content that's out on Tableau server. So you can govern those permissions by groups that you might already have in your Active Directory and just port those over into Tableau server. So for instance, I've got my facilities group, my IT group, operations, stuff like that. But coming back here to the project that all my content is in, I can specify whether or not this group of users can see this content, or if they can edit it, if they can save that information or download all the data, or if they can connect to that specific data source. So if I add another group here, I get to manage those permissions either from these templates that are predefined as, you know, this person can view information, anyone in this group can interact with the workbooks, and I'm not going to add any permissions for that data source. So there we can see it applied some defaults of you get these permissions but not those, and you get no permissions about my data source. So that's how some of the access is controlled within Tableau server. If you're not interested in putting on those more data-specific filters. So I see another question here about importing data into Tableau through an extract. Later, I'm updating the original data source. Is there a way to quickly update that workbook without redoing all your work? Yes. So part of this schedules option is setting refresh schedules for extracts. and that's something that can be managed through Tableau Server. So once I have a data source, let's actually find our data source that we published up earlier. So here we have our education admits data source. And let's change how that's scheduled. So coming up here to refresh schedules, this is going to connect back to the underlying data source. So whether that's a database or a flat file that multiple people work in and then it's updated multiple times a day, and this is going to reach back to that file path and set it up based off of the schedule you define. So let's say this runs at 3 a.m. on weekdays. I can just set that schedule to refresh at 4 a.m. on weekdays, so typically when nobody's in the office or really accessing that data. And I see a follow-up to that. Is there a similar function in desktop? So you can schedule those refreshes, but it's not going to be done automatically unless you come back in desktop. Now, if that is just a data source that you've connected to, you took an extract, and then you know there's been changes to the data source and you want to see those reflected, I would just right-click on the data source and click refresh. So that would recreate the extract and then change the data visualization based on what the new data might say. So a little bit different roles of what server and desktop might be accomplishing there. Desktop, definitely you would see that data updated, but it wouldn't be, continually automated on a schedule. That's more what server's for.
So, and I see one other question here. What's the difference between using college or major as filters and as hierarchy filters?
So a difference between that would be, let's say I have all of my student IDs out here. And I want to see the college that each of those falls into. And then maybe the major associated with them. If I pull this major field over onto the filter shelf, and I only want to see students who major in accounting, that's how those filters would be applied. Whereas I'm going to remove that filter. If I add a filter for just students in the College of Business, then all of the majors within the College of Business would still be displayed. Whereas before it was just specific to one. And that's something you can play around with as is necessary for your end users. So that's the way that a lot of people build in a bunch of interactivity into their dashboards. So we now have business and communication out here, and maybe I'm only interested in accounting and journalism majors. So does that help answer your question there?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Great.
It looks like I may have missed a question here somewhere. How to publish dashboards to a specific group. I think that goes back into, you're going to publish the dashboard, and the groups that have the ability to view what they're allowed to view, that takes care of that situation. So you may have the same workbook that covers all of the different colleges for your school, but engineering can only see engineering, and it's just one workbook though. And arts and sciences can only see arts and sciences. But you've built the work, so each group can only see their information in it.
Yeah, and that might go more towards how content is managed within Tableau Server. So the broadest scope of that would be at the project level. And this is just kind of the landing page here of Tableau Server. And you can see I have some dogs out here on my projects. But for instance, you might have just a project for the recruiting team and just a project for IR, and then grant access to those projects as needed.
So does that answer that question for you?
So we just first create a few projects, and how to apply your user group to this project?
Sure. So just within the education project, I'm going to go to permissions. And by default, all users come into this project. And I might want to add another group based off of the groups I've already defined within Tableau Server. Or if there's individuals that you need to add, you can just select user instead of group. Our best practices are typically that we have people managed at the group level and put permissions management at the project level, because then it can get very granular and a little bit confusing and requires a lot of time if you're managing each individual user's permissions by themselves.
So when you publish a dashboard, by default, it's go to all user, add the group you choose?
So it's governed by the permissions of the project that I publish to. So within Desktop, if I'm publishing this workbook, I can set some of the permissions whenever I publish. If I want to add specific permissions for different groups, but that's also something you can do out on server. And it inherits the permissions of the project that you publish to. So for instance, I think the IT project might have some more specific permissions, but right here it's inheriting those based off of what we see within the IT project. So if I published up to here, then all users would have no permissions, so they wouldn't be able to see it, and only the IT group and IT managers would be able to see things.
Oh, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I know permissions can be kind of a multi-layered thing that can get a little confusing.
Okay.
Have I missed any other questions? Please feel free to chime in if we haven't answered any of your questions that you've put out there. I think we've gotten them all, but I may have missed one. Okay, are there any additional questions? Okay, well then expect from, I will be sending a follow-up email with this recording and the workbook over to May, and then May will share it out to your listserv group and make sure everybody has access to it. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be there. And if I am your main contact for Tableau, I will certainly assist you or make sure that you get the introduction to the correct person who handles your higher education group. So I hope it was helpful and answered some questions for you. And I know we have another 25 minutes or so, but without any additional questions, I'm thinking that we should probably go ahead and wrap and give everybody back 30 minutes of their day.
And May was asking if, Whitney, you can add your contact info here.
Oh, sure.